Welcome, NutritionRadio.org listeners. This is Lonnie Lowery, a university nutrition professor of over 20 years and podcast host of long-running shows like Iron Radio. Come on in. Fitness Fridays.
Hey, everybody. Wow, episode 90. Coming up on the end of season 1. All the season 1 little 10-minute episodes are going to remain on YouTube. We'll see what happens with season 2 when we go to a larger format. Similar topics, just separated with bumpers. But anyway, we're going to talk about fitness today. In this case, we're going to compare running and lifting for brain function. I know we've had people that listen to Iron Radio or Nutrition Radio that were students or older people. This could affect both. These populations we're talking about today are people that are aging, middle-aged and older, but it's something that's really calling for constant physical activity, at least in this first case, in order to maintain, some of those networks, if you will, the neural networks in your brain. This first one, admittedly, is a mouse paper, but it's brand spanking new from May of this year. Running throughout middle age keeps old adult-born neurons wired in. Originally by Giselle Galoustian, and the piece is spread through Science Daily. Here it comes, summary. A new study provides novel insight into the benefits of exercise, which should motivate adults to keep moving throughout their lifetime, especially during middle age. Long-term exercise profoundly benefits the aging brain and may prevent aging-related memory function decline by increasing their survival and modifying the network of the adult-born neurons that were created in early adulthood, etc. Fascinating stuff. Continue to exercise, keeps that circuitry on board for you. Now, we're going to keep this pretty high level. There's lots of brain structures and circuitry and even methodology to get bogged down into, but we're just going to keep it pretty light. Among the first structures of the brain affected are the hippocampus. So I will often joke about hippocampus and my long-term memory and that sort of thing. Deficits in cognitive ability are associated with reduced hippocampal volume and connectivity with other parts of the brain. So, in a new study from Florida Atlantic University and some colleagues in Mexico City, the researchers found the effects of long-term running on a network of new hippocampal neurons that were generated in young adult mice at middle age. So it looks like they're examining them at middle age and what's happened from things that were created previously. It says the mice that ran demonstrate that running throughout middle age keeps old adult-born neurons wired, which may prevent the delay of aging-related memory loss or neurodegeneration. It's very interesting. Exercise is medicine, and it's for your mind, too. It's not just biceps, it's brain and biceps. More than 6 months after tagging the adult-born neurons with a fluorescent reporter vector, let's not get bogged down, they identified and quantified the direct afferent inputs into these adult-born neurons within the hippocampus. This was published, by the way, in the journal eNeuro. The researchers have shown that running wires these old, previously formed new neurons born during early adulthood into a network that is relevant for the maintenance of episodic memory. By the way, episodic memory, we're talking about the recollection of specific events, times, locations, things of that nature. And specifically, the study showed that long-term running significantly increased the number of adult-born neurons and enhanced the recruitment of presynaptic subcortical cells into their network. So here's a quote for you. Long-term running may enhance pattern separation ability, our ability to distinguish between highly similar events and stimuli, which is a behavior that's closely linked to adult neurogenesis. That's a quote from Carmen Vivar, PhD. She's a corresponding author. So I can tell you, for one, I had big student loans for a long time to try to make some neural connections and gain new knowledge. I really want to try to keep as much of my cognitive ability as I can now that I'm middle-aged. However, I'm not a runner. Plus, that was a mouse study. Well, there's a review in the Journal of Sport Health Sci. It's 2022, so just about a year ago, and they looked at different types of exercise in people. This is by Huang and colleagues, Huang, Comparative Efficacy of Various Exercise Interventions on Cognitive Function in Patients with Mild Cognitive Impairment or Dementia. And this was a systematic review meta-analysis. Now you might say, yeah, but I don't have dementia. Well, this is also mild cognitive impairment. So granted, if you're young, you're wanting to prevent these things, we can't assume this is also a great prevention, but if it's going to be something that's a treatment, it could very well help with prevention. It says exercise is a promising non-pharmacological therapy, and we've talked about different nootropic type things here on this podcast, but it's unclear which type of exercise is most effective. So they compared and ranked the effectiveness of various exercise interventions on cognitive function in patients with mild cognitive impairment, yes, or dementia. They did the usual PubMed, right? That's the National Library of Medicine, Cochrane, these different databases. They looked at randomized controlled trials and that specifically examined the effectiveness of exercise on patients with these conditions. Outcomes included global cognition, executive cognition, and memory cognition. So, of course, there's lots of different tests and ways to look at cognition. We touched on this actually before on the show. So what are the details? 73 articles from 71 trials and over 5,600 participants were included here. All types of exercise, they report, were effective in increasing or maintaining global cognition, and resistance exercise had the highest probability of being the most effective intervention for slowing the decrease in global cognition. Also in executive function and memory function. So, wow, I need to control my, confirmation bias here as someone who has, yes, done some cardio, but primarily lifted throughout his life. This is very interesting. By the way, if you're interested in what we're talking about specifically in these different kinds of things, executive function, according to Psychology Today, there's a definition here for you. Many experts believe that the human mind contains 7 different executive functions: self-awareness, inhibition, non-verbal working memory, so short-term memory related to sensory or spatial info, verbal working memory, so short-term memory related to speech and language, emotional regulation, motivational regulation, and planning and problem solving. All of that executive function, all of that enhanced with resistance exercise, arguably the most. Now, a little caveat here. It says in subgroup analysis, patients with mild cognitive impairment revealed somewhat different effects, and multi-component exercise was most likely to be the optimal exercise for them as far as global cognition and executive function. However, even in this case, it says only resistance exercise showed significant effects on memory function for patients with mild cognitive impairment. Overall conclusion, resistance exercise has the highest probability of being the optimal exercise type for slowing cognitive decline in patients with cognitive dysfunction, again, with this slight differences in subgroup analysis. I would think that most people who do resistance exercise also engage in some type of cardio. I certainly have over the years. I bet you have as well. So that's our final topic this week. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Remember, we are on episode 90. We're closing out this first season, season 1, which will all be on YouTube, 100 episodes, mini episodes, if you will. In the future, we're going to open up the format a little bit, as we've discussed. By the way, next week I'll be traveling. You're going to get some pre-recorded stuff. You should get it scheduled at the same time with the same subjects and all that sort of thing. We've even got some listener mail from some valuable listeners like Dave and others. So stay tuned for that as well. We'll see you next week, at least virtually, because I'm going to be at the International Society of Sports Nutrition Conference. Take care.
The NutritionRadio.org podcast is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, check with your physician, nutritionist, or qualified exercise physiologist in order to make the progress that you need.